So we're all in agreement that God of War Ascension was a bit mid, right? Okay, well let's just pretend we all agree so I can make a point. Because I'm sure we can all at least agree that it wasn't really a necessary inclusion to the series. At best, it added a bit of dubiously necessary lore surrounding the blood pact that Kratos made with Ares, and the consensus in 2013 was that it was a commercial and critical disappointment. They stated that directly in the documentary Raising Kratos, that people who made the game felt that it wasn't their best work.
The overwhelming vibe was that they were done with Kratos. You know, Kratos either needed to go away or needed a fresh start.
And many critics repeated the sentiment that the game was just more of the same, and that the series was in a bit of a rut.
So it's disappointing that the release of Ascension brings with it a whiff of a series that's treading water rather than driving forward, especially after the eye-popping spectacle of God of War 3.
And to be clear, I know that I've gone on record in the past as saying that games journalism is the corpse that keeps on twitching, but I do think that stuff like this does have value. The reason I treat games journalism as a joke is that there's too many people trying to make a buck and not enough content to go around. So you get a lot of clickbait articles, a lot of derivative works, and a lot of vapid non-articles like how to play this extremely highly publicized game, and also the occasional absolutely horrid take. But even at its worst, independent and professional games journalism can inform you of a pattern. So when the people who worked on it, an entire industry, as well as everybody I know who's played the game agrees that Ascension was an unnecessary game that was desperate to exist, it's hard to deny that it's at least something worth considering. So when you get to a point like that in a long-running franchise, it becomes immediately clear that for the series to continue, something needs to change. Whether you like it or not, or whether you want it to or not. And that's the situation that Santa Monica found itself in with God of War going into the 8th generation, all the way up to the announcement and eventual release of God of War 2018. Because when you look at the series as it sat after 2013, you're basically left with 4 options of what to do, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and varying levels of difficulty. First of all, just let the series die. Do nothing and move on to something new. And while I'm okay with my favorite franchises ending these days, back in 2013 when Ascension came out, this was definitely something I would have not liked, even though I was aware that the series was basically written into a corner. Plus, given what we got, and despite what others may say, I'm glad that this was the option that wasn't taken. However, it could have very easily gone that way. The second possible path was to reboot it. This probably could have been easy to do. By 2018, the series was 13 years old, and many franchises newer than that had already been rebooted. Matter of fact, when I first saw the announcement, I, like many people I'm sure, was confused. Because I was under the assumption that it was a full-tilt reboot, like they were taking the same character and translating it through the filter of Norse mythology, because how could this game possibly follow up on the ending to God of War 3? Which, let's be honest, was probably the intention. They probably didn't want any sort of indication that this was part of an ongoing story, because that might have cut into the sales from people who were otherwise unaware that they had to play the previous games to get all the context. Which is kind of funny, because I feel like at this point collectively, we've all known that it's a continuation for so long, we kind of take it for granted. Oh yeah, he moved to Scandinavia and started a new life among their pantheon. Makes perfect sense. Making this a full-tilt reboot would have actually been an easier thing to do, because it means they could throw away any possibility of inconsistencies that this game and its sequel may provide. But then again, we'd also be throwing away years' worth of emotional investment. The third option is just to keep doing the same things without really changing anything. Don't change the character or the general setup, just keep doing what you're doing. Like, just find some reason for him to get equally mad at the Norse gods, or maybe another set of gods as he was with the Greek gods. And then let the universe take its natural course. There can be some emotional depth, but overall we're looking for angry man who refuses to die taking out his anger on the gods. This would have gotten very old very quickly, considering the fact that we had basically experienced the absolute height of what you could possibly do with this concept. Once you literally destroy an entire realm, there's really nowhere to go. Hence why things like Ghost of Sparta or Ascension seem like such massive steps back, and any attempt to match God of War 3 would have come across as contrived and pointlessly repetitive. If it wasn't already old, it would have gotten old very quickly. The fourth option is the most difficult to pull off. The option where you do something completely new while also sticking to the same continuity. A soft reboot, if you will. You take the gameplay systems that were, let's be honest, great, but also getting really old by the time the 6th game came out, and make something similar but distinctly fresh. Then you use the old games as the building blocks for a story that aims to recontextualize everything through a more human, more grounded perspective. A risky move because you're not sure if it will turn out well and you risk alienating a chunk of the fans. But in order to continue with a stale concept, you have to be willing to be bold in order to refresh it. This is obviously the choice they went with. New setting, new characters, new gameplay, new story. And this is a concept that has an obvious zeitgeist in order to create a new story. Because let's not kid ourselves, even for the stoniest of hearts, the events of the Greek saga would be incredibly traumatizing.
My vengeance ends now.
It's obvious that the original God of War games are so larger than life that the human element would rarely be considered by the average player. It's just a pure power fantasy. But then when you really stop and think about it, yeah, everything that happened would be really damaging. I think I've made the observation in the past that Kratos obviously has PTSD, but he also has too much pride to let what he sees as weakness slow him down. Very rarely does he allow it to shine through. And there's so much to pull from. The lingering trauma from spilling the blood of his family, of dying a painful death multiple times, of being through multiple wars, and of course the lingering trauma of having lost himself in his anger. Seeing the death toll that can take place when a powerful man who has nothing to lose and a clear goal stops at nothing to achieve his revenge. There's only one real-world example I can think of somebody who caused this level of destruction. J. Robert Oppenheimer. And I'm sure we've all seen the video of him after the bombs dropped.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent.
You can kind of see how reality might inform fiction here for someone who caused that level of destruction. So when you look at it from that perspective, Kratos' mindset is so obvious to write for, it's almost a no-brainer. His trauma, his shame, his anger, his present is informed by his past. As has basically been drilled into our skulls at this point, he's not ashamed of what he did to the gods, as he shouldn't be. They pretty much asked for it.
I killed many who were deserving, and many who were not.
But it's all the innocent collateral damage that has caused him the amount of pain he has. Even if you wanted to ignore that, you really can't. It's not like leaving the toilet seat up or forgetting to put the milk back in the fridge. That's a world-changing event that has ruinous consequences for everyone involved, including the perpetrator. Kratos gets his revenge, but at what cost? The destruction of his entire homeland and everyone in it. As a matter of fact, as far as we the audience knew at the time, Kratos had basically destroyed all of creation, all in the pursuit of, let's be frank, petty revenge. And that's the thing, because very few revenge stories ever actually treat revenge as the right path. John Wick, for example, is one where I've heard people in the past try and build it up as a demonstration of the inverse of the quote-unquote cliched revenge story, because he gets his revenge in the end. But the funny thing about John Wick is, yeah, he gets his revenge, but then he spends the next 4 films and counting paying for it. As with most revenge stories, whether they get their revenge or not doesn't really tend to change anything, and as a matter of fact, usually only makes things worse. This is possibly the absolute prime #1 example of this. To say that Kratos does not view this positively is not a stretch whatsoever, even back then. It's actually treated very negatively. Kratos himself says as much.
Look around you, Athena. The world stands in ruin. What good is your message?
And it's also not a stretch to make that the basis of another story. All it is taking something that was already established and making it the main focal point, which informs Kratos' reclusive stoic nature. He spends years in self-exile, and even now finds himself in a level of exile out of a desire to not hurt any more innocent people, and his years of being a recluse has left him with no desire to deal with anyone. He's quietly cut himself off from the shame and the emptiness. Then you have the other aspect of his character. He's afraid to get close to Atreus because he's so afraid of having history repeat itself and having him spill the blood of his own family again, that he's petrified of getting close to Atreus. He doesn't want to get close to him because he doesn't want to have his heart broken all over again. It's an easy way to use the previous game's narrative to allow for a bit of compelling drama. There's also the apprehension of being the general he once was ever again, and the fear of what might happen if he loses himself in the anger once again. Then it ultimately culminates with the decision of whether or not he wants to become the god of a new age. If he truly has changed enough that he can be assured that what happened once will never happen again. Plus, there's also the continuous through line of Kratos' redemption. Can he be redeemed through his actions, or does he even deserve to be redeemed? Something that, despite being a question more or less posed throughout the two games and the DLC, never gets a definitive right or wrong answer. It's all up to personal interpretation. Obviously, I'm leaving a ton of details out because there's only so many grand points we can cover succinctly, but as a general illustration of how the past does indeed inform the present, look no further than this scene in the Valhalla DLC. This is one of the unsung best moments in the entire series, full stop, because there's so much great drama that can be mined from everything that happened.
Lose everything and everyone. There's to be enough left inside so that I do not become you. I do not know. But I have hope.
Hope is what makes us strong. It is why we are here. It is what we fight with when all else is lost.
Mwah. How can one possibly face a version of themselves that they hate with a visceral passion like this? I feel like when you play through 2018 Ragnarok and Valhalla, especially Valhalla, you really get the sense of the overall theme of the Norse games being, we are not the sums of our past. We may have been shaped by our past, but we individually have the ability to be better, to use our past mistakes as learning opportunities to make a better future for ourselves and the people around us. Because while living with your mistakes can absolutely suck, some mistakes are unfixable, and the only thing that you can do is be the best you that you can be in the future to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. You don't and you shouldn't let your past define you. Which kind of brings me to my overall point here. This is all an explanation as to why his character makes sense as a follow-up. In fact, originally, this was going to be a video about how Kratos' character, and just Kratos' character, needed the Norse games, but I realized it's a lot bigger than that. So there's a factor I have in the video title that I haven't really touched on in the video itself, and that's the fact that not just Kratos, but the entire series needed the modern God of War games. And that's for one simple reason. There was nowhere else to take the franchise. Nowhere compelling anyway. Okay, maybe it's ignorant to say there was nowhere else to take it, but generally speaking, the way the story's played out, I can't think of any better way for them to have followed up and recontextualized the first 6 games. Taking a larger-than-life concept and viewing it through a more human filter and seeing how one deals with the shame of their past. How someone copes with the trauma and mistakes, and all they really did was take the human element of this series and push it to the forefront so it can no longer be realistically ignored. I feel like that's plain as day, or at least should be. I don't think there was another direction they could have taken that would have made sense and would have been compelling to a large-scale audience. And while the old games may have left the series waning popularity-wise, these new games are by far the most popular games in the series and have introduced millions upon millions of people to something they may not have otherwise wanted to try. Why is that? I don't know. An appealing premise and effective marketing, I guess. But the fact is, I feel like some fans don't want this. This is why I felt the need to make this video, because there continues to be a significant chunk of people who lament the shift in direction to the point that they would rather see the series dead. Or at least that's the impression I get. I mean, sure, these games have been caught up in the rage-bait grifter black hole that permeates through all of media discourse right now. As a result, I've seen a lot of anger and very unhinged takes, but those people are barely worth addressing because they're not serious people. They're just fundamentally angry people who view media through a lens of a desire to get mad at anything that slightly offends their really ill-defined sensibilities. Why? Because for outrage farmers, getting their audience mad at everything that comes out is the only way they make money. If it wasn't profitable, we wouldn't have half the level of toxicity we currently do. Here I'm more so talking about the people who are actually fans but hated the shift enough to wish it never existed, and as a result kind of downplay any positives that may have been brought out through the new games. I'm not saying whether or not the shift in style was good or bad. My overall point is that whether you like it or not, it was a necessary step for the series to continue. I feel like there is this aversion to change that a lot of people have by default because, hey, change is scary, change is difficult. I thought the same thing at a time, but is this really much of a stretch? It's not like, I don't know, to take a completely random example, taking a kiddie platformer and turning it into an action platformer with Lord of the Rings dialogue. By all accounts, it's really just basic evolution here. And I'm specifically using the term evolution instead of maturation, like some people might say, because I feel like it takes an insane amount of ignorance to claim there wasn't a degree of depth and maturity in the old games. I would never say that. In fact, that's one of the things I appreciate the most about modern God of War, is it's able to allow me to look back at the games I already loved in a completely different way. Something that I discussed quite a long time ago. However, I feel like there's a sizable portion of people out there who don't want this series to have depth. They view it as nothing more than a vehicle for violence and gore, and feel like any sort of attempt at anything more than that in the old games or the new games misses the point. I've seen the term going soft many times, such as with the series creator David Jaffe. Yeah, he doesn't like where the series has gone, and I've said before and I'll say it again, I respect the hell out of David Jaffe because he's created some of my favorite games of all time. But with that said, the dude is fucking weird. Sometimes he comes across to me as someone who lives in a perpetual state of emotional arrested development and never really grew up in certain ways, therefore can only really view media through a very specific filter. I don't like taking shots at other people, and I mean no disrespect, that's just the impression I get. And it's sad to see someone who doesn't want to see their own creation escape that very narrow viewpoint of what he wants it to be, because anything beyond that is some sort of bastardization of his vision. But as difficult as change is, I think we should want the things we like to be more than what they are, more than a very narrow identity.
Tell me when I'm telling lies!
But I see this every day, in the comment section, on social media, everywhere. People lamenting the fact that the series changed and pushing this narrative that God of War quote-unquote would have been better off the same. To be clear, I think God of War 3 pantses the new games. God of War 1 and 2 I think also arguably do as well. But that doesn't mean that I don't think the new games don't have their accomplishments, qualities, and quite frankly, a reason to exist. I like both old and new God of War, and sure, some people just don't have the ability to do that. I've said many times in the past that there are plenty of reasons to not like these games. That's not an issue. It's the elitism I take issue with. Because without modern God of War, without the shift in focus, without the reinvention of the series' identity, without quote-unquote going soft, this series would have already been dead, probably. Earlier I talked about option 3, keeping the series alive by doing the exact same thing, but really God of War Ascension was just that. Because the Greek series, for all intents and purposes, ended after 3, and Ghost of Sparta was just an extra addendum to add context to the third game. Meanwhile, Ascension was their attempt to keep the series going after the story was over and after the series had already exhausted its shelf life. Sure, it may have been a different part of the story, but it was still attempting to milk a cow permanently lodged in a comfort zone. I guarantee that had they done that again, try to go with option 3 one more time, that would have been it. The gameplay and story would have probably been more of the same, fans and critics would agree that the series was kaput, the game would bomb, and that would be it. Either Santa Monica makes a new IP or they close down. Either way, it's the end. I can't guarantee this 100% would have happened, but it was very likely. There may have also been other ways for them to take the franchise after 2013, but I don't see an alternate universe where the series kept going down the path it did and it result in anything but stagnation and death taking place. And I don't think anybody should want that or be okay with that if there's an alternative available. You can not like something while also not being toxic about the fact that it exists at all. There's a lot of things that I enjoy in life, but there are a lot more things that I don't enjoy that I wish I did. However, I don't want the things I don't enjoy to burn. I'm just happy that something can appeal to other people than me. Crash Bandicoot, for example. Haven't been a fan in years, but there's some good stuff that came out of that series that really appealed to the fans and seemingly gave the series a level of freshness that it hadn't felt in Lord knows how long. That's great. I'm really happy for that. And guess what? I'm also really sad that the series may end up being dead now due to corporate incompetence. Because while I'm not a fan, I don't want that for the fans. Even if I don't personally get any enjoyment out of it, and I wish that was an attitude that more people could take on board. I mean, despite what I'm sure some people will say, I have literally no beef with anybody who just casually does not like these games. That's never been the issue, and to say otherwise would be insanely egotistical of me. For me, it's always been about the toxicity and this weirdly aggressive attitude that some people have towards the things they don't like. And indeed, there's the inability to treat things they like casually. because it's literally not that serious. But sometimes I feel like trying to ask for civility in gaming discourse is like trying to ask a horse to shit diamonds. But a man can dream. Once again, I should specify I'm not discussing the quality of these games. In this instance, it's not about whether or not they're good or bad, it's about the fact that they were necessary. I can't stress that enough. Either way, that's all I've got, so I'll just say the usual thing. If you like what I do here and want to support the channel, you can like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. At time of writing, the Patreon is still on hiatus, but you can still pledge if you feel the urge to do so. Either way, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.
you